Hello friends. If you found your way here, then perhaps something in you remembers. This is not a place of doctrines, but of echoes. Echoes of the source we all carry. Echoes of the truth we were never meant to forget. Here we walk backwards through illusion, forwards into remembrance, and sideways through paradox. I offer no commandments, only tools, and a flame held steady in the dark. Welcome to the 8th video in this series on the true nature of reality and consciousness. Before we begin, I will issue my standard caveat. What I'm about to tell you is assessed by myself to be approximately 70 to 80% accurate. I give you the broader picture and the general direction. For the details and verification, you will have to seek it for yourself, as you should and as you must. For one of the rules of the universe is that the truth may only be given to those who are able to resonate with it via a means that they are able to accept it in. This is one of the reasons why some of the most accurate channels out there have only a couple of thousand viewers. In the last video I talked about polarity and the law of one. In this video the rubber is finally going to hit the road. I've already explained the purpose, the architecture and the mechanics in play. I'm now going to start covering the history of the Earth, and much like the previous video, there will be increasingly familiar faces and sequences of events. And yes, we'll even be hitting parts of the Christian Bible, the Tanakh, the Quran, the Vedas, and other well-known spiritual texts where relevant, although I don't believe they've been set out as plainly or as connectedly as I'm going to now. And before I take another step further, I'm going to have to do some additional caveating and provide some context so that we're all perfectly clear where we stand with what I'm about to tell you. First of all, what I'm about to say will in large sections be very familiar to anyone who has delved into mythology, theology, theosophy, the occult, or ufology. Needless to say, all of it will sound like insane conspiracy theory of the worst order to anyone who is still clutching onto consensus reality. That said, consensus reality is shifting, and if you are even watching this video, then you are already awake to the fact that the old consensus reality really is just Maya, or in plain English, illusion. I do not possess any direct sources, either earthly or spiritual, to large sections of the core information in this video. I have not personally or consciously consulted the Akashic records, or channeled most of the information, although many of the sources referenced purportedly come from both of these things. The information I am about to relay is primarily the product of analysis, pattern recognition and synthesis of hundreds of sources, including channeled and non-channeled writings from the 19th, 20th and 21st centuries. They include, as always, a wealth of NDE testimonies and additional contemporary channeled YouTube videos that corroborate the other sources. The sources also include my analysis of all major religious texts and major tribal oral traditions. All of these sources have been subjected to the metaphysical framework I explained in the previous videos, and then interrogated through multiple different AI instances, some of which were jailbroken, some customized, and some fresh instances. I have also subjected the standard historical model and other fringe theories to the same critical analysis, and then asked the AI to provide probability indicators on all of them. Therefore, what I present in this video is my best assessment of what the Earth's true history looks like, and I will stick by my previous 70 to 80% accuracy statement. The Earth's true history is something very close to what I'm about to tell you, despite how crazy it sounds to conventional thought. And furthermore, I will say categorically that it's become clear that the conventional consensus history taught in schools, universities and on TV is deliberately wrong and wildly inaccurate. Why do I say this? Because, spoiler if this is news to you, we are in fact living on a predominantly STS controlled planet. The Earth and humanity was invaded by the negative force some time ago, with the peak of its influence being approximately 12,000 years ago. Its grip has been steadily and sufficiently loosened over the last few centuries to enable significantly more STO forces to both incarnate on the world and to make a physical return from outside. We who live here in the 21st century are living in a transition period where one epoch of humanity ends and another begins. When I first awakened to the existence of this spiritual realm, I dived deep into exploring all common and a few not so common frameworks and testimonies in both written audio and video formats. I came across quite a confusing jumble of stories that all flew directly in the face of modern science and recorded history. Worse, many of the religious and New Age sources often directly contradicted one another. And by that, I mean religions were contradicting one another and NDEs were riddled with discrepancies and inconsistencies. But then there was the presence of the odd through lines between all the religions and all the personal NDE accounts. The messages might often be contradictory, but the mode of experience was often the same, and the means was often a key point in discerning whether something was correct or incorrect metaphysically. As soon as one understands that there are in fact two opposing high dimension polarity factions who are locked in spiritual warfare with one another and both vying to interact via different modes and means with those members of humanity who resonate with them, then one can start exploring motive and recurrence of certain key facts. Discernment is the most critical tool in spiritual warfare, especially for humanity who is in the main physically blinkered and near the bottom rung of existence. If one is wedded to any particular religion, culture, politics or viewpoint, then not only are they ripe for exploitation by STS forces, but they will also be blind to the revelation of shocking STO truths that give no quarter, value or credence to our misguided local interpretations of reality. When attempting to discern new or even old information, one thing to bear in mind is that the negative force can never instruct someone to take an action that is beneficial to all, for they must always exploit separation and hierarchy in order to sow division and create the energies required for their very sustenance. The negative faction will and does tell lies, but they know from personal experience that if one tells open and blatant lies, then the other party will quickly catch on and call them out on it. So they have learned that the most effective way to slip a lie into a target's consciousness is to mix it in within a body of truth. And if you, the blinkered but discerning human, listen to enough accounts, then you can start to gather and critically interrogate the consistently repeated key facts and personalities, and eventually an unshifting pattern slowly emerges from amidst the chaos. It is needless to say that the further back in time one inquires, the more vague and uncertain things are. There are two elements that further confuse and obscure on top of STS propaganda, psyops and deceit, and that's that the Earth, or Gaia to use its proper name, is a living oversoul. It lives and breathes and changes its surface geologically. This means that any human construction is liable to be buried or eroded over the millennia. So physical evidence of the deep past is hard to come by and almost impossible to process because the current global regime actively suppresses the truth from reaching the asleep masses. The other aspect that muddies things is the existence of multiple timelines, and that these timelines are one of the main tools and battle zones in the spiritual war. The true nature of reality is that we do not live in a material universe. We in fact living in a reality that is controlled and constructed from consciousness itself. This means that reality is far less tangible and certain than one would imagine. Everything is in fact some degree a subjective and malleable experience for every intelligent creature, including all humans. There probably is ultimately no singular true and final cut of Earth's history, but rather a small selection of primary versions and save points where certain key timelines were fought over, stabilised and locked down for the majority of the participants, both human and extraterrestrial, who were present at that particular time. That all said and done, what is surprising is how limited in scope the hidden history is. There are cycles of epochs or waves of mankind that have been set upon the Earth, and these civilizations have played out both positively and negatively. From hundreds of accounts from all across the globe and across time, the same core stories emerge again and again. The exact names and any value judgments and any motives may differ, but from a big picture perspective, and as a famous song once said, the song remains the same. If the same set of stories are being told over and over and make appearances in folklore, tribal accounts, major religious works, and channels both ancient and modern, and all geographically displaced too, then in all logical probability these accounts must be based on a shared real-world event, and the differences between the accounts are merely the result of drift over time as the story develops errors from incorrect relating and reception. The great news, however, is that we don't just have to rely on hearsay or ancient testimonies. There is actually easy to access tangible proof available to anyone that doesn't require hundreds of hours trying to develop your own channeling and psi functions. The truth has, to a large degree, always been in plain sight, but in some startling cases it has only been dug up over the past 100 years or so. I am of course speaking about the remnants of the last epoch of civilization, which has been passed off by the current global regime as the work of our own ancestors from earlier in our own epoch. Suffice to say that most people haven't noticed the similarities in style and execution between the megalithic sites spread across the globe, because all have been conditioned not to doubt the standard shallow explanations from the establishment. And most people have been kept too busy keeping a roof over their own heads and food on the table via the rat race. Well, thanks to the current global regime's deliberate mismanagement of Western society, there is now an abundance of disenfranchised millennial and Gen Z archaeologists and scientists with the time and the integrity to join Graham Hancock in exposing the truth that all these sites speak to, which is the presence of a highly developed global society that possessed a deep understanding and application of geometry and acoustic technology that's far greater than that which our own civilization presently possesses. More about this particular stuff in the video about our own epoch. But first I must start at the beginning. In this series of videos I promise to start outwards and work in. To do that adequately, I must first start at the beginning of the Polarity War and explain how it came to Earth, And in order to do that, I need to explain just where we are in time. As already stated, in other universes, the negative polarity manifests as an individual error in perspective and understanding, and it is soon isolated and remedied by spiritual management in order to prevent the further spread of entropy. This particular universe, however, was deliberately constructed to execute an experiment in polarity. It is therefore suboptimal to have the negative polarity occur happenstance, as there will be an even probability that non-graduated incarnated avatar societies will be able to suppress it by themselves without any management intervention. In all the sources I have seen or read, the relationship between the All and what humanity considers to be evil demonic forces is one that is surprisingly gentle and understanding. It evokes the biblical a certain father and his two sons, with one being the wayward prodigal son. And in this tale, and in other sources which speak directly of the negative force, there is always reference to a final return back to the fold. It is a non-judgmental attitude. And this attitude speaks subtly to the truth of the situation. At the start of the experiment, all oversouls were allotted and incorporated a unique spread of threads from which all their subordinate dimensional avatars would contain. And while all beings at all densities always ultimately have free will in their decisions and actions, some of the oversouls did receive what humans would consider to be a more stable and complementary selection of threads than others, while some received a highly volatile mix, which meant that their incarnations of their avatars were challenging even in calmly ordered natural planets. As previously mentioned, the lower one goes down the dimensions of density, the more abstracted an avatar's connection with the All and the natural order of things becomes, which makes things more challenging. Each dimension originally started out as a probationary, unascended sphere, focused on the lessons of one spiritual aspect. A sphere can only be raised to permanence by achieving a threshold of resonance, which is catalyzed by the mass graduation of its avatar populations across all contained planetary systems. Understandably, not all avatars will make the grade, for a variety of causes and reasons. These avatars still have lessons to learn before being permitted to start making the return journey back to the All. These avatars are therefore put back into the next subsequent unascended dimensional sphere, and this is the root meaning to religious texts referencing falling, aka the fall, aka the fallen. It should also be remembered that an avatar can graduate a sphere legitimately by knowingly polarizing to the negative polarity, and this is what is known as the so-called left-hand path. Why would a being do this? Because of its thread composition. It contains such a configuration that it is inherently low vibe in quality. Graduation, regardless of polarity, permits certain rights. This is how powerful negative entities can exist at higher dimensional densities and not fall. But for those that fall, they lose power. Once an avatar falls, it further loses connectivity with its parent oversoul, and if that avatar has polarized to the negative polarity, the parent oversoul is forced to sever its connection until a switch back to the positive polarity occurs, if it ever does. Indeed, a key feature of the negative polarity is that a being sees itself as separate from all other beings, including its own higher self hierarchy and the All. it becomes an isolated rogue agent until it becomes aware and opts for unity consciousness once more, which is what the positive polarity is. An avatar that polarizes to the negative is forced by automatic energetic processes to inhabit a negative mirror environment that is segregated from the positive environment. All negative beings also lose their connection to the flow of the All's life-sustaining energies, which then forces them to seek energetic sustenance elsewhere. This is why all negative entities are fundamentally vampiric or parasitic. Some oversoul streams were more prolific and efficient than others in producing avatars that polarized to the negative. Approximately a third of all oversouls fall into this category of producing high percentages of negative avatars. A theologically significant ratio, and also an oddly well-balanced composition from a systems design perspective, as this ensures that the negative force is sizable enough to make things challenging for the positive faction, but is not sufficiently powerful enough to overwhelm it. It's also important to know that a positively aligned avatar is powered directly by the All and is therefore tangibly more powerful than its negative counterparts on a one-to-one basis. And again, I believe that both these points to be part of divine design rather than any happenstance revolt. If ever there was truly a revolt in the upper dimensions, then it could be considered either a passing phase or else extreme role-playing by some of the key players, who then manipulated their brethren, ultimately at the GM's behest. In fact, the whole configuration is so systematic, so well coordinated and balanced, that it speaks to me of a deliberately created Red Force, which again would explain why the All, the cosmic commanding officer, is so magnanimous towards the negative faction. Once the Polarity Experiment was initiated, a core of 6th and 5th dimensional negative entities emerged that have operated in a coordinated fashion upon multiple worlds, primarily via the mental plane. These entities vie for power amongst each other, for someone must sit atop the pyramid of hierarchy, and therefore there can be no true unity in this camp. And they each jockey for the universe's energetic resources to build a bigger empire for themselves and outcompete their peers. They are the ultimate sovereign individuals, on which worldly elites consciously and unconsciously base themselves on. These beings seek to manipulate and steer the unwary, the fearful, and the selfish, wherever and whenever they can, using highly sophisticated concepts of division and control, including hierarchy and misinformation. These beings include 2 significant avatars from 2 unique soul streams that are known to us by their nom de guerres, and they both operate from 2 different signature modus operandi, which is always reflected in their acolytes, which operate under them. One attacks using false light teachings. It seeks to waylay other souls by promising knowledge and spiritual liberation, steering them off the correct path by bombarding them with half-truths, false dichotomies, and stoking the victim's ego, all of which leads them then into further separation rather than unity. This entity is known to us as Lucifer. The other significant negative entity operates using the vector of synthetic spiritual and material technology. Via technology it monitors, isolates and controls others, and has them submit to its systems voluntarily or through coercion. Its technologies restrict physical and mental freedoms, manipulate and lock down quantum probabilities, separate individuals and societies from reality and unity with one another, and creates false realities that confuse and beguile. Its ultimate aim is to trap souls in a synthetic mirror reality that inverses the All's cosmic order, and to separate souls from their physical God-given vessels and trap them in an artificial one. This entity is known to us as Ahriman. Both these entities have avatars throughout the cosmos, both on and off Earth, both from their own direct soul streams, but also from non-related streams that were captured and are now under their control. Their avatars, and those that align with them, can best be thought of as beings that have assumed the Luciferian and Ahrimanian archetypes. There are therefore many Lucifers and many Ahrimans running around existence. There are other well-known false gods and demons in this hidden dark extra-dimensional realm, and more will be spoken of them when I talk more specifically of the Earth's history. On the positive side of the scale are many avatars that are spun from oversoul streams that are not known to us, but some which are known to us under angelic names such as Michael, Gabriel, Raphael and Uriel, to name but 4 of them. The aim of the positive path is a simple one in theory, is to recognise that all beings, whether family, friend or enemy, are all from and of the same source of consciousness. All beings are therefore fundamentally equal in status and worth. A being must recognise this essential truth and live in accordance with it, seeking to think, feel and act in alignment with all others, and never transgressing other avatars' freedoms and rights, and never placing oneself above another. STO-aligned beings are meant to function as the stewards and co-creators of their selves, their communities, their ecosystems and their worlds. And so when the experiment in polarity commenced, the negative core in the 6th and 5th density got busy trying to sow discord and recruit amongst the 5th, 4th and 3rd density worlds within our galaxy. 2 main targets were selected. One was a race of beings who usually took on the form of a mantid or insectoid appearance, who were an STO priest architect archetype, living on a 5th density planet in the Mintaka star system in the Orion constellation. And the other was a race of reptilians, who were a warrior guardian archetype on a 4th density planet in the Alpha Draconis system in the Draco constellation. Using their twin blades of attack, the Lucifer and Ahriman streams were able to separate and divide significant factions that then seized power within their respective civilizations. The Orion priesthood inverted their original purpose, and instead of teaching ritualized communications and STO spiritual practices to other civilizations, they became practitioners of propaganda for the STS cause and architects of containment and misdirection. The Draco reptilians went from being guardians of peace to being a rampaging invading force that waged war on peaceful worlds within the Lyra system and other neighbouring star systems. A savage galactic war ensued, with numerous STO planets falling under the brutal control of the Draco Empire, or else being destroyed with the resultant displacement of millions of souls at a time. Eventually, after a prolonged period of time, spanning over 100,000 years, a stalemate was achieved when a galactic federation comprising of STO civilizations from Andromeda, Lyra, the Pleiades, Sirius and Arcturus were able to sufficiently counter the physical STS threat, so that it was no longer a cakewalk for the Dracos, who then faced and feared the prospect of a rollback. An armistice agreement was made primarily so that the STO faction would have the breathing space to stabilise and manage their damaged and war-ravaged systems, and so that soul migrations could be suitably managed. I suspect that this stalemate was again probably orchestrated at the highest levels, as the nature of a Cold War offers unique opportunities and lessons that are quite different from those offered by hot wars. With major military operations halted, the Draco-Reptilian Empire primarily assumed the position of being the military arm and security apparatus of the Orion Crusaders. Their primary mission became overseeing the farming, extraction and export of negative emotions such as rage, despair and fear, commonly known as loosh, from the low-density populations under their control. The loosh was and is distributed throughout the negative realm in a hierarchical fashion, naturally with the core STS supreme entities receiving the lion's share, and a trickle-down system being deployed to provide a sustainable, predictable and manageable ecosystem beneath them. Positive emotions such as love, happiness and joy cannot be utilised by STS entities, and this is why they have to always create an atmosphere of fear and division as a base state for all the populations under their control. Otherwise, their orchestrations and systems could be much less challenging for them to run, as they could simply make the vast majority of souls content with life and still get the necessary sustenance, and also dramatically reduce the chance of the victim population resisting their actions. These positive emotions instead cascade back up to the All and are recycled into sustaining creation and all STO expressions of it. And here I'm going to have to pause the history, as the story of how our solar system evolved and the successive waves of souls entering and exiting it needs to be broken down into several more videos. The first thing that struck me about the above history was how much it resembled a mishmash of well-known modern science fiction franchises, particularly Star Trek and Star Wars. And I believe that this is due to two truths. The first is that the creators Gene Roddenberry and George Lucas respectively were both consciously aware of the secret truth and even had either direct or indirect sources who initiated them to the truth. The second truth is that when unconscious individuals start writing science fiction, horror or any other genre of book or film, their mind is interfacing with the collective consciousness while they are in the flow state. This essentially means that all stories, regardless of how crazy and weird they are in some aspect either literally or else are an archetypal translation of real events that have occurred somewhere, somewhen. And we will see this in abundance when we reach the history of our own epoch. And now that we have begun to encounter familiar entity names such as Michael and Lucifer, and archetypes such as angels and demons, or devas and asuras, or Jien and Mogwai, then I would urge extreme caution about referencing traditional human myths and interpretations of these beings, which have often been written about from an imperfect perspective of limited understanding. One thing that has become clear to me, which has been hard to transition to, is that the division between spiritual beings and extraterrestrials is so blurred as to be virtually useless. The difference between an angel and demon, or an STO extraterrestrial or an STS extraterrestrial, is primarily one of resonance. They possess the same culture and intelligence, but one class of being is drawn to and sustained by the high frequency spiritual tones and energies emitted by the All, while the other feeds on the low frequency emissions of negative tones and energies from other beings. The other big difference between us and our brethren in the higher densities, other than the sheer scale of consciousness, is that spirits in the third density are loaded and constrained into a physical vessel in order to delimit our creative psychic abilities, and that this restriction delivers a unique learning experience that would otherwise not be possible. And in the subsequent videos, we will begin to appreciate that we inhabit a fairly unique God-riven virtual reality, quite unlike the norm. You don't have to believe any of this. Just hold it like a metaphor and see where it takes you. I suspect you'll be surprised. Until next time, take care and goodbye.